Jack Thunder and the Fragments of Anima, Book 2, Water. Chapter 1, An All-Important Vacation. "Frosty, are you ready yet?" Jack Thunder shouted to his sister. It had been a few days since Jack Thunder saved Tempest Island from a wendigo and proven himself worthy to wield the legendary Air Fragment Stormbringer. Now he was on the hunt for the remaining 5 fragments, and he had just detected the presence of the Seastone in the Turquoise Archipelago. At least he believed it to be the Seastone. The fragments would pulse when they detected each other, after all, and Stormbringer just started glowing dark blue, the color of the water element. If his calculations were correct, it would be important to get down there and find it before it fell into the wrong hands. "Just give us a second, we're almost ready," Frosty shouted back. She knew how important this mission was, too. Before he knew it, they were all ready to go to the surface. Jack Thunder glanced back at Stormbringer. Indeed, the staff was still pulsing, shining emerald and sapphire. He, Frosty, San, and Razor made their way to the edge of the island. Far down below, they could see the teal sea gleaming like so many diamonds. Concentrating hard, Jack Thunder remembered the spell he'd used to generate a rainbow bridge when he'd first found the staff. "Powers of rain and summer storm, I beseech you, split the skies open and draw down a bridge of colors. Cast it from here to the central island." And just like magic, a rainbow beam emerged from the staff and began snaking down towards the island. When it was finished, it snapped off, the other end landing at his feet. "Well, you ready to go?" The team nodded. "Well then, let's go!" Jack Thunder exclaimed. With that, he jumped on the rainbow and began to slide down it, all the way down to the surface. The rest of the team followed suit. San fought the urge to screech as he slid down head first. Razor, meanwhile, seemed to be enjoying every minute of it. Jack Thunder and Frosty gently touched down on the beach, dusting themselves off. San and Razor, who were not used to using rainbows for travel, landed far less gracefully. San ended up face-planting in the sand with the wyvern whelp landing on top of his head. Razor quickly jumped off and ran to Jack Thunder's side. San picked himself up, dazed but unharmed, shaking his head side to side to clear it and get the sand out of his nose. "Ugh, I'm getting too old for this." His vision cleared and he looked around. They were surrounded by a pristine pink sand beach. To one side, turquoise waves lapped at the edges of the beach. To the other, a riot of palm trees and tropical flowers greeted them at the edge of the jungle. They had landed on the central island's west coast. The Seastone has to be around here somewhere, Jack Thunder thought. He glanced back and forth from the sea to the jungle. He swung the staff inland, and it began to pulse faster. Motioning to the rest of the crew to follow him, he made his way into the jungle. The islands of the Turquoise Archipelago may have been popular vacation destinations, but they weren't known for having clear paths running through them. The thin trails that cut through the jungle were full of holes and overgrown with tropical vines and mosses. Jack Thunder and his crew had to step carefully to avoid tripping and falling. Despite this, Jack Thunder always found the islands to be quite beautiful. Tropical flowers of all colors decorated the trees, and the songs of tropical birds filled the air. But the island was different from how Jack Thunder remembered. He recalled how he had visited the island a couple of times when he was younger. It was around the dawn of autumn, the same time of year as now. He remembered the balmy, sweltering heat that encompassed the island, and the cool breeze that provided scant relief. To beat the heat, the island's residents and tourists alike bathed and swam in the turquoise sea in droves. Not so much of that now. He had seen no sign of anyone in the bay, whether tourist or otherwise, just a bunch of tropical fish. And the island seemed colder somehow? The sun hid behind a cloud, that explained it. But that didn't explain why there was no breeze. The air was as still and placid as a glacier. As they trudged further into the jungle, Jack Thunder had one question on his mind. Where is everybody? At the very least, the residents of the island should have been preparing for the autumnal equinox. The dawn of autumn had already passed, and fairies across Alterus would use the date as a cue to start preparations for the end-of-year celebrations they would host as winter approached. But there was no one else around. Maybe they were working on it in their homes? Before long, the crew came upon a clearing filled with lodges made from palm logs. They had arrived at one of the many villages of the islands. Jack Thunder spotted a few talking animals and earth fairies mulling about. He sighed with relief. Maybe now he would get some answers. Chapter 2. Trouble in Paradise. Before Jack Thunder could ask any of the villagers about the Seastone, the village came under siege. Balls of fire fell from the sky and crashed into the ground just as Jack Thunder jumped out of the way. The team scattered, hiding in the bushes as flames continued to fall from the sky. All of a sudden, the doors and windows of the huts burst open, the residents within drawing big handheld bazookas. They all fired at once, sending more of those massive flares into the sky. Back and forth it went, becoming more and more relentless as time passed. Eventually, a pair of doors from the biggest hut in the village burst open, revealing a massive cannon flanked by about 6 talking animals, dogs and cats and mice. They turned it towards the source of the fire and took careful aim. With a series of loud bangs, the cannon fired 3 times, sending blue comets straight into the stratosphere. As they landed with a series of explosions, the attack on the island ceased. The fairies of the village burst into raucous celebration. Slowly, Jack Thunder crept out of his hiding place to confront the villagers. So the village wasn't abandoned, but why were they firing weapons at each other? He thought that the islands were at peace with one another. He approached a group of dog and cat people and barged into their conversation. Hey, what was that all about? Since when does anyone around here have bazookas? Hey man, don't be such a square. They know darn well what they did. We're just defending ourselves against them. What in Alterus do you mean? What did they do? Are you blind? They attacked us. For no reason. That's why we had the bazookas. They needed to learn a lesson. But why? Why did the other islanders attack them? He wasn't getting any good answers from these jerks. He tried something else. Alright, well, if you're not going to tell me what's going on, do you at least know where the Seastone is? At the mention of the Seastone, the group nearly jumped out of their skin. It was almost as if the very name struck fear into their hearts. The Seastone, one dogman barked. What do you want with the Seastone? Guys, look! That's San behind him! Gasped the dog woman. She had noticed the Tengu approaching them from behind the storm gremlin. Is that Stormbringer? A cat woman shrieked, even more terrified than the others. Jack Thunder was getting more confused by the minute. Why were these people behaving like this? Scatter! With that, every fairy in the village rushed back into their homes, slamming and locking the doors tight and boarding up their windows. Jack Thunder and crew exchanged glances. Something was very, very wrong. The group trudged on, this time to the north. They had no success with the last village they visited. No matter how many times Jack Thunder turned it over in his head, it just didn't make sense. Why would they be so afraid of San? And shouldn't they have been relieved that someone had showed up with the Stormbringer? Didn't they know about the trouble on the horizon? About the Heart of Darkness's return? Jack Thunder felt in his gut he already knew what was going on. But he didn't want to focus on that just yet. He had to focus on getting the Seastone. Then he could deal with whatever was leading these people to start attacking each other. Without even thinking, he began humming to himself. It was that song again. That one he'd made up to cheer himself up. Now it wasn't so much about cheering himself up as it was about clearing his mind. At least when he got to the next village, there was a small chance that things would be normal. Then he could figure out what was going on. Jack Thunder didn't even realize how far he had come until he heard a piercing shriek and felt something bowl him over from the side. Before he knew it, one of those talking animals, a squirrel woman this time, was right on top of him, struggling and clawing at him as Frosty pulled her off of him. Growling like an animal, the squirrel woman tried to twist around and bite Frosty's arm, but Frosty quickly froze her jaw shut with her ice magic. She then tossed the squirrel away and froze her arms and legs in place to keep her from running away. "What is wrong with you?" The squirrel tried to speak, but her words just came out as muffled grunts. "Oh, right, that." Frosty unfroze her jaw and repeated her question. "What in alters has gotten into you?" Music hurts, pain, help," she babbled, delirious. Jack Thunder kneeled down to her level. "It's okay. How many fingers am I holding up?" he asked, holding up 3 fingers. The squirrel woman's head bobbed, her eyes failing to focus on anything. What was going on? Was she having a seizure? Should he get a healer? Her delirium was replaced with pure terror the moment she saw the staff in his hand. She shrieked once more, causing Jack Thunder to reel back in pain from having his ear screamed directly into. The ice held her fast to the ground, but that didn't stop her from frantically trying to flee. Jack Thunder noticed Stormbringer pulsing with astounding speed, but it wasn't blue anymore. It was green, just like when he'd banished the wendigo that had infested Tempest Island. His face darkened. Now he had his answer. He charged up his staff. He pointed the prongs at the squirrel woman and surrounded her in white light. The effect was immediate. She began retching, black fluid leaking from her mouth. There was much less of it than there was with Terry Paradise, Jack Thunder observed. It was coming out rather easily, too. He could probably handle this without doing much else. Sure enough, the wendigo slipped out of her mouth rather easily. It was a tiny thing, slug-like with glowing white eyes. That didn't mean it was docile, though. It wriggled and screeched in frustration as Jack Thunder held it in his magical grasp. One quick recitation of the Wendigo banishing incantation later, and the Wendigo was gone. The squirrel woman lay on the ground, having collapsed from exhaustion. Frosty knelt next to her, melting the ice around her arms and legs. "Miss, can you hear us?" No response, though she was clearly still breathing. Frosty picked her up and slung her over her shoulder. They'd better get this fairy to a lay spa to heal before she got worse. Luckily, Frosty could spot one off in the distance. A waterfall, flanked by glorious mango trees and flowing with the purest water. In the lake below, Frosty could see a bed of tiny glowing crystals, each teeming with water magic. This at least should be enough to restore her charge to health. She pointed it out to Jack Thunder, and he nodded, following her. Frosty set her down on the white sand of the bank and stepped back. The rest of the crew took the opportunity to rest. Sun took a drink from the lake, while Jack Thunder began cupping his hands to catch water from the waterfall and began splashing his face with it. After some time, he took some of the water he gathered from the waterfall and brought it over to the squirrel woman. Without warning, he splashed it on her face. She jerked awake, coughing and spluttering. She took a few seconds to gather her bearings and began looking around. She saw the storm gremlin that had saved her earlier, as well as the Fipinella that had frozen her arms and legs to the ground, and an elderly Tengu whom she thought she recognized from somewhere. How did I get here? Chapter 3. Ambushed. "You don't remember what just happened?" Frosty asked, flabbergasted. "You attacked my brother and tried to rip his antennae off." "What? I did that?" The squirrel woman tried to remember what had happened. That's when she remembered. He had been humming to himself, and the music had pained her deeply. That's why she attacked him. She didn't remember much after that. "Yeah, you were acting all weird and stuff. You had a wendigo. It's gone now, Jack Thunder confirmed. Forgive me. I couldn't control myself. Don't apologize, we're here to help. That's when the squirrel woman noticed Stormbringer in Jack Thunder's hand. It was then that she recognized the Tengu. Is that San? Never mind that, San interrupted. Do you know anything about the Seastone? The Seastone? Oh, yes. You must be here to find it. What a relief. Things have been crazy these past few weeks. Everyone in the archipelago has lost their minds. They just all of a sudden started attacking each other. I came out here to try to get help, but that wendigo grabbed onto me and started draining me before I could do anything. That's why I was so out of it earlier. I think it attached itself to my brain. I'm sorry. What's your name? Jack Thunder asked. He couldn't believe he had forgotten to ask earlier. Oh, my apologies. My name is Miss Current, but you can call me Emily. Emily, that's a nice name. Do you have any idea where the Seastone might be? Emily sighed. It could be anywhere on these islands. It might not even be on the islands. No one has seen the Seastone since the War of the Wendigos. Jack Thunder's face dropped. This was what he feared. He looked around and noticed that the trees were already starting to lose their color. Time was running out. What were they supposed to do? Jack Thunder got an idea. He knew the crew couldn't split up. It was far too dangerous for that. But Stormbringer was still tracking the Seastone, and it could lead them in the direction they needed to go. He turned around, and the staff pulsed faster. It was pointed to the east. Beyond that point, there was only a small expanse of jungle before they hit the beach, then the sea. So it seemed like it was somewhere in the ocean. That makes sense. He showed San and Frosty what he'd found. Guys, I think the Seastone is in the ocean to the east. Frosty and San glanced at the staff and nodded. All of a sudden, they heard a faint rustling coming from the bushes behind them. They turned around but didn't see anything. Must have been the wind, Frosty figured. San figured just as much. Neither one thought the wendigos would dare trespass upon the waterfall. They couldn't have been more wrong. Before they knew it, a war cry burst from the jungle, and the crew was surrounded on all sides by crazed fairies. Yowling like animals, they mainly focused on Jack Thunder, trying to grab his staff. He tried to fight them off by zapping them with lightning, but they kept on coming. Little by little, they began to wear him down. Jack Thunder realized he couldn't fend them off forever. If he kept up like this, they would completely overwhelm him. So he did the only thing he could think to do. He ran. As he dashed through the forest, jumping over exposed tree roots and slicing through vines, he only had one thought. He just needed to get some space between him and the mob. Then he stood a better chance of fending them off. After he dealt with them, he could get back to the waterfall and meet up with his team there. After far too long, Jack Thunder skidded to a stop. He leaned against a tree, trying to catch his breath. I think I lost them. He was far enough that he couldn't hear the mob anymore. His eyes darted around as he listened for any signs of them. Nothing. Just the calls of tropical birds and the chirping of insects. He breathed a sigh of relief. But now he was faced with a new problem. He had gotten himself lost. Hello? Is anyone there? He was met with silence. Now he began to panic. He had no idea where he was, let alone how to get back to the waterfall. And what about the others? What if the mob took them? What was he supposed to do? He stopped himself, taking a deep breath. Falling to pieces would do no good, especially if the Wendigo-crazed mob was still out there. And he knew that Frosty and San were more than capable of defending themselves. Even Razor was far from helpless. He could shoot lightning out of his mouth after all. As bad as he felt about abandoning them, he knew they could handle their own in battle. Besides, it wasn't them the islanders were after. That's when he got another idea. He already knew the Seastone was to the east. He could just head in that general direction and meet up with them there. They had already seen how Stormbringer tracked the Seastone, so they must be headed in that direction. Now, which direction was east? Stormbringer was still pulsing, albeit a lot slower now. It might have pulsed slightly faster when Jack Thunder turned around, but the change was too slight to tell. He groaned in exasperation, turning his head up to the sky. That's when he remembered. He could judge which direction was which by the position of the sun. He estimated that it was only a couple of hours past noon, so the sun would be closer to the west. If he went in the opposite direction to the sun, he would end up walking east. He quickly found the sun in the sky. He turned his back to it and set off. Hopefully he would catch up with the team on the way. He didn't have the heart to think otherwise. Chapter 4. Cast Away. Jack Thunder looked up from his lunch, once again surveying the scene below. He had decided that looking for the coast would be easier and safer if he was riding on a cloud, so that's what he was doing now. And this way, he didn't have to risk getting attacked by any more wendigo-possessed fairies while he was eating. He was drifting at a rather leisurely pace with the sun at his back. It was far warmer up here than it was down there. He still couldn't see the rest of the team down on the island, but at this altitude, he couldn't see much of anything on the ground save for miles and miles of greenery, so it didn't matter. Jack Thunder couldn't believe he had gone all this time and never realized just how beautiful the archipelago looked from up here. He had seen it many times before when Tempest Island drifted over it, but he'd never really appreciated the way the sun glinted off the rivers and lakes of the central island, cutting lines of gold through the foliage. The sea ahead of him lived up to its name, outfitted in shades of azure and teal that swirled like smoke. The other islands were the same. The central island was the biggest of all of the islands in the Turquoise Archipelago, but the 3 islands surrounding it were impossible to miss. He could see one of them right in front of him some distance from the east coast. It was nearly as long as the central island, stretching from north to south. As he drifted closer to it, Stormbringer pulsed much faster, but it wasn't just the Seastone it had sensed. Now it was emitting an aura that flashed back and forth between the indigo of the Seastone and the menacing green it had glowed when it sensed the wendigo that had infected Miss Current. Its pulses were different too. They were strong and insistent, as if to warn its wielder of danger ahead. Jack Thunder put down his lunch. A cold sense of foreboding washed over the storm gremlin as the sun once again hid behind a cloud. Something bad was going to happen. Something very... He didn't even see the first shot. It whizzed past his head, exploding in a shower of flames before him. He clambered to his feet, gripping the staff tightly. All around him were massive bursts of flame. The sky had become an inferno with explosive fireballs coming from every direction. He was under attack. Jack Thunder acted quickly. With one wave of the staff, he summoned a mighty gale. Not only would that propel the cloud away from the crossfire, he reasoned, but it might blow away the flames that shot at him from every angle. He clung to the cloud for dear life. The all-encompassing howl of the gale deafened him to the explosions all around. He squeezed his eyelids shut against it, clutching Stormbringer in his left hand with equal force. He didn't care that he couldn't see or hear anything. Right now, he was entirely focused on getting himself out of there without falling off the cloud. Every fireball that grazed his ears and every frantic pulse from the staff in his hand made another drop of sweat form on his brow. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. I can do this, he repeated, desperately trying to convince himself he could make it out alive. And that's when a fireball struck him in the left shoulder. Jack Thunder screamed and dropped the staff. He didn't feel any pain, but he just knew he'd hurt something. He clutched his injured shoulder with his right hand, grunting and trying to get his bearings. He looked down and saw Stormbringer slipping off the cloud's edge. He tried to grab it in midair but lost his balance, tumbling off the edge of the cloud. As he fell, he could hear the explosions above getting quieter and quieter. Or maybe it was just the ringing in his ears. It was only a few seconds before he hit the water, plunging deep into the abyss with a resounding splash. When he opened his eyes, he saw Stormbringer sinking to the bottom of the sea. He tried to move his left arm to swim, but was met with no movement, only searing, splitting pain. The blast that had hit him in the back must have burned a lot more than just his skin. This made it quite difficult for Jack Thunder to propel himself downward and catch the staff before it sunk into the abyss, but he managed. He caught it in his right hand. It was only then he realized how far down he'd gone. He wasn't sure if he could make it to the surface or not. He was starting to tire. Oxygen deprivation and the size and weight of the staff didn't help matters. Still, he didn't come all this way just to drown. He made his way upwards. The journey was exceedingly difficult due to his injured shoulder. Eventually, there came a point where he could move no more, and he floated in the water, slowly sinking downwards. So this was it. He was just going to drown, with no one around to know what had happened. That's when he spotted familiar figures in the water. He knew what they were. These were reef sirens. Half-human, half-fish people who lived in the tropical oceans of Alterus. He had seen them before in the Turquoise Sea, but he'd never met them up close. One of them stopped in its tracks, looking straight at him. With one last burst of energy, Jack Thunder waved his one working arm frantically, trying to grab the figure's attention. With Stormbringer in that hand, he was sure he was impossible to miss. It didn't last long, though. Exhaustion took hold once more, and Jack Thunder floated helplessly in the water. "Help me, please." Just before he lost consciousness, Jack Thunder could see the reef siren swiftly swimming towards him. Interlude 1: The Legend of the Seastone. Mallow could only weep as she glanced back at the desiccated reef that used to be her home. It was never supposed to be like this. She may have been a rebellious youth, but she always protected those she loved. That's why she went into the Order of the Sea of Forever. It was the best hope she had of becoming a guardian, one of the many protectors of Alterus who was trained in defenses against the wendigoes. But now all that was gone. The Order, her home, everything. Even the most elite guardians the Sea of Forever had were no match for the foes they faced. She choked back the urge to scream. Those abominations. They had just chewed straight through them. Devoured them faster than a shark in a pool of lame carp, as her late grandmother would have said. It was a miracle that she and most of the young, orphaned minnows the Order housed made it out with only scant injuries. She didn't even want to think about what would have happened if the wendigos had decided to sample the nursery. She shook her head. She couldn't indulge those thoughts. She knew what she had to do. Around her neck she carried a smooth piece of sea glass, housed in the middle of a starfish skeleton that she wore around her neck. She'd had it ever since she'd hatched from her egg. She'd even taken it when she went to train at the Forever Temple, but she never thought she would be using it for this. To defeat the menace that threatened this world once and for all, she was going to need a lot more than her skills in hand-to-hand combat. And the sea glass pendant she wore around her neck was the perfect vessel for the power she would need. She took it off, clutching it in her right hand. She shouted the incantation. "By the power of Anima itself, I dedicate this pendant of mine to the path of water. Come unto us and imbue this pendant with the strength of hurricanes, the speed of tsunamis, the powers of raging tempests and monsoons. May it serve us well in the battle against the forces of Null. As she recited the incantation, the Sea of Forever began to rage, transforming from a peaceful gulf into a raging, torrential whirlpool. A mighty monsoon poured down on Mallow as she held the pendant aloft, bathing it in its waters. The sea glass in the center of the pendant began to glow, white at first, but shifting to azure, sapphire, emerald. All of a sudden, the storm ceased. The monsoon cleared and the whirlpool collapsed in on itself. It was just as if the maelstrom had never occurred. Mallow looked back at her pendant. She could feel the anima contained within resonating with her body's magic. An aura of swirling aqua teal and deep sapphire surrounded the sea glass in the center. This was no longer a simple pendant. This was the Seastone. Chapter 5. Under the Sea. Shapes and colors kept phasing in and out of Jack Thunder's line of sight. He wished he could see them more clearly. With some effort, they began to settle, taking form. Some part of him thought that he would be back in his room on Tempest Island, this entire ordeal having been a dream. But when he regained consciousness, he was in a very different setting. He looked to be in a hospital room of sorts. The room looked to be made out of colorful coral, with seashells decorating the walls. Even the cot he was laying on had a frame made out of tube corals. Outside the window, he could see the vast seascape, with a rainbow of tropical fish swimming just outside. That's when the events of the day came back to him. He'd fallen into the turquoise sea. He saw a siren swimming towards him just as he was about to drown. That's all he remembered. So what happened? Had he drowned? "Oh good, you're awake. I was so afraid we'd lose you." Jack Thunder jumped at the voice suddenly coming from right next to him. He whipped his head around and saw the siren he'd seen earlier. She was about his age, maybe a little older. She had aqua-green scales and lemon-yellow fins, and wore a seaweed-green skirt. Her eyes were coral pink. So he wasn't dead. The siren had saved him. But how was he able to breathe underwater? He felt his neck and got his answer. Gills now sprouted from each side of his neck. She must have cast an underwater breathing spell on him. He sighed with relief. He tried to sit up from the position he was in, but an explosion of pain in his shoulder forced him onto his back. "Careful, you really blew out your shoulder out there." Of course. He remembered that. How could he have forgotten? He looked over and saw that his left arm and shoulder had been wrapped in a cast. He winced. Was it really that bad? It was pretty bad, the siren continued, unwittingly answering his thoughts. Mom said that it was the worst sprain she'd seen in a long time. A few broken ribs, too. You're going to hurt yourself if you move it around too much. Jack Thunder deflated. How was he supposed to wield the Stormbringer if he couldn't even move his left arm? His thoughts were still completely exhausted from before. He stared out the window, trying in vain to think of a solution. He turned back to the siren. How long did they say it'll take? His voice cracked like it hadn't been used in ages. I don't know. Probably a few weeks. Even with healing spells? She nodded. What you got hit with wasn't just normal everyday magic. The doctors detected traces of null magic in your bloodstream. It won't kill you, but it does make it harder for you to heal. So even with our best healing spells, it's going to take longer than usual. Just his luck. He flopped onto the cot, letting out a long, drawn-out sigh. He turned to the siren. Hey, thanks for saving me out there. Don't worry about it. What's your name? I'm Jack Thunder. I'm Buckthorn. Jack Thunder smiled. Buckthorn. That was a very unique name. Oh my Anima, San, did you hear that? San looked up from where he was looking. Did you see something? I just heard a big splash in the sea over there, Frosty exclaimed, pointing towards the west coast. Do you think he fell into the ocean? Well, we were already headed for the west coast when we were ambushed. I would assume that he would go this way, but how do you know that the splash was him? I think I heard him screaming too. Oh, what could have happened to him? They rushed through the rainforest, heading towards the coast. They spotted a group of reef sirens resting on the beach. The sirens had overheard the conversation and were now glancing amongst themselves. They had a feeling they already knew the answer to Frosty's question. Have you seen any sign of my brother? He's a storm gremlin with a huge trident-shaped staff, Frosty asked them. A pink-scaled siren with red fins spoke up. Does he wear a dark green jumpsuit? Frosty nodded frantically. Razor chirped in confirmation. We just passed by him. He looked like he was drowning. Buckthorn rescued him, but I'm not sure where she took him. Probably to the hospital is my guess. The hospital? Where is the hospital? It's in the Great Barrier Kingdom down there. The siren pointed downwards. You'll need an underwater breathing spell if you want to check there. And with that, all of the sirens began channeling their magic. As Frosty, San, and Razor were enveloped in water magic, gills formed at their necks. The sirens motioned to the three to follow them, and they plunged into the bay. Frosty could only hope that the sirens could be trusted, and that her brother was somewhere safe. After some time, the two of them reached the Great Barrier Kingdom. Why else would they be surrounded by brightly colored buildings fashioned from coral and seashells? They had many doorways like the holes of a sponge, from which reef sirens of all colors and sizes crawled in and out of like bees in a beehive. Frosty and San followed the pink and red siren to a taller building. This one was carved out of the face of a stone, covered in brain coral and sea moss. Razor sat outside while they entered the building. The inside of the hospital was much more ornate than the outside. Coral and shells of all colors decorated the interior of the lobby. Frosty could have mistaken it for a palace hallway if she didn't already know what it was. Excuse me, did a storm gremlin in a green jumpsuit come in here earlier? The receptionist, a sky blue reef siren with slightly tattered violet fins, looked up from his desk. A storm gremlin in a green jumpsuit. Did he have a trident staff with him? Yes, that's him. Is he here now? He should be. Dr. Atlantea's daughter brought him in. He was in a pretty rough shape, but he pulled through. He's in his recovery room now. Let me just get the number for you. Frosty sighed in relief. He was alive. There was no telling how bad a state he was in, but at least they knew he wasn't dead. San put his claw on her shoulder. Okay, he's in room D34. Just remember to take these with you. The receptionist handed them a couple of visitor passes. The two thanked him and made their way to the elevator. So, do you volunteer here often? Jack Thunder asked Buckthorn. Just then, the door swung open, and the storm gremlin could see Frosty and San walk into the room. Jackie, you're all right! Frosty swept her brother up in a hug. Hey, watch his shoulder! Buckthorn snapped. He's hurt really bad. Frosty noticed the bandages wrapped around Jack Thunder's left arm. Oh, goodness, what happened to your arm? After I lost you guys, I decided to follow Stormbringer's pulses to the west coast. I figured I could meet up with you there. I summoned a cloud to ride on so that I wouldn't be attacked again. Instead, I was caught in a firestorm and one of the fireballs hit me in the back. Burned my shoulder pretty bad. Buckthorn chimed in. Mom thinks that it was null magic. He's gonna be alright, but it's blocking the doctor's healing magic. It's going to take him a while to recover. Jack Thunder smiled weakly. This is Buckthorn. She's really nice. He introduced her to them. Son turned to Buckthorn. Nice to meet you, Buckthorn. Frosty continued for him. Thank you so much for rescuing him. This whole trip has been a mess. There was this one squirrel woman, Emily I think her name was. She had been possessed by a wendigo, but Jackie here banished it. She said the whole island was like that. Then we got attacked by a whole bunch of them. Have you seen anything like that here? Buckthorn shook her head. Not that I know of. The closest thing I can think of is just now when Jack came in. Just then, the entire building jolted, and screams could be heard outside the window. The Great Barrier Kingdom was being invaded. Chapter 6. Avast, ye scurvy dogs! The four of them jerked their attention to the window. The clear blue ocean had turned to black as a shadow loomed over the Great Barrier Kingdom. Turning their gaze upwards, the crew could see the underside of an enormous pirate ship. Rappelling down from the bow of the ship were more reef sirens wearing red bandanas emblazoned with the symbol of a cracked black heart. Buckthorn knew exactly who they were. Blackheart's crew? But that's impossible. They're our allies. Why are they attacking the kingdom? Blackheart? Jack Thunder asked. Captain Blackheart. She and her crew took an oath to protect the Great Barrier Kingdom from outside threats, but I guess she went back on her word. Jack Thunder had a feeling he already knew what was happening. Wait, do you think the Wendigos got to Blackheart too? Buckthorn paused. I didn't think about that. She never wanted to turn on us before. Jack Thunder jumped up from his cot. If there really were Wendigos out there attacking the kingdom, he didn't want to spend another second lying around. Buckthorn tried to lay him back down. Jack, you're not in any condition to fight right now. Just look at your arm. Not to mention that you're still weak from the null magic. Doesn't matter to me. I can't just lie here while the city goes to ruins. If I do nothing, we'll all die. Before Buckthorn could protest, Jack Thunder bolted up from the cot and dashed straight out of the room, clasping Stormbringer in his uninjured right hand. Jack, you're gonna... Ugh. Buckthorn and the crew ran after him. This storm gremlin just never seemed to learn. All Jack Thunder could see was chaos. Everywhere he looked, sirens were darting left and right, whether they were running from the pirates or plundering the kingdom for treasure. He knew that with his injured shoulder and broken ribs, fighting through them was not going to be easy. He opted to dart from cover to cover, behind fallen rubble and between strands of seaweed. He was a soldier in a no-man's land, inching ever forward but not daring to expose himself for more than a few seconds at a time. He found Stormbringer especially difficult to aim using only one hand, his non-dominant hand to boot. So he evaded the pirates instead, only shocking them when he needed to stun them to get away. Even so, he managed to zap a couple of the buildings by mistake, leaving dark ash marks in the lightning bolt's wake. He ducked into an alleyway and wiped his brow. They were everywhere. How was he supposed to get to the ship? He didn't even think he had the strength to make it up the rope, let alone deal with all the pirates swarming around it. All of a sudden, he heard a shriek. A siren pirate flew backwards, and Jack Thunder could see another encased in ice. Son and Frosty had come for him. Jackie, come on, we need to get out of here. Frosty called to him from the fray, just before she got tackled by another pirate. Beside her was Son, throwing about 5 pirates off of his right wing. Buckthorn took cover behind him. Razor stood guard around her feet, hissing and spitting lightning at the crowds. Seeing her gave Jack Thunder an idea. He began singing the melody he had hummed to himself back in the jungle, deliberately loud enough so they could hear. Just as he suspected, the pirates reeled back in pain and covered their ears, too stunned to act. Frosty and Sun threw the pirates off of them with ease. Well then, Jack Thunder had his answer. This was clearly a case of mass Wendigo possession. He ran to Buckthorn's side. "Buckthorn, I figured it out. They're all possessed, but they can be driven back with music. I'm gonna try and climb to the top of the ship. If they start getting too bad, I need you to use your voice and sing a few notes for us. That should stun them long enough for us to get up there." And with that, the 5 of them began to ascend the ropes. Jack Thunder slung the staff over his back so that he could use his one good arm to climb, but it was still an exceedingly arduous process. Not helping matters were the siren pirates homing in on them from every angle. Every time one of them grabbed them, Buckthorn would sing a few notes, stunning the pirate enough to let them go. The bodies of stunned and knocked out reef sirens littered the seafloor below. Slowly but surely, they made their way to the top of the bow. Chapter 7: The Showdown of Captain Blackheart. Jack Thunder broke through the water's surface, shaking his head and tossing droplets of salt water everywhere. The rest of the team followed suit, climbing up on the edge of the deck. Jack Thunder unsheathed Stormbringer from his back and gripped it in his right hand. "All right, Blackheart, where are you? Come on out, you coward." He was met with only the creak of the boat in response. All of Blackheart's crew was down in the water, but where was she? All of a sudden, a frigid gale began to howl. The crew looked up and spotted streaks of black flying through the suddenly stormy skies. The streaks fell from the sky, splattering black fluid on the deck as they began to take shape. The wendigos began to circle them like sharks in the ocean, swirling faster and faster until the team was trapped inside a whirlpool of ebony darkness. All of a sudden, they saw Captain Blackheart. Jack Thunder could already tell she was possessed. If her rusty scales and black fins, a stark contrast to the rainbow of hues the other reef sirens boasted, weren't a dead giveaway, the stream of oily fluid leaking from her mouth onto her front definitely was. Her expression held a look of cold intent. She adjusted the seafarer's cap on her head, which bore the same cracked black heart insignia that the other pirates wore. "Well, well. It seems as though meddlers have come to spoil my raid." "You! Why did you invade the Great Barrier Kingdom?" Buckthorn shouted. "Haven't you heard? The Heart of Darkness is returning, and with it comes the end of Alterus. There's no point in defending this kingdom anymore. Just take what you can and run. At least then you'll stand some chance of survival." "Run? Where to? You know the Earth portals haven't been open since the war. And how do you know Alterus is doomed anyway? Are you thick, young siren? The Fragments of Anima haven't been seen since the War of the Wendigos. Without the fragments, there is no chance of stopping that monster." "We have the Air Fragment right here," Jack Thunder butted in, thrusting Stormbringer in Blackheart's face. The rust-colored reef siren reeled back in terror. "Ah! Get that thing away from me!" Just like that, the Wendigos were upon them. They pounced on the team and held them in place like gobs of glue. Stormbringer clattered to the ground and slid just out of Jack Thunder's reach. Buckthorn, who had ducked out of the way just in time, ran to the edge of the bow. "I'll get help!" She jumped overboard back into the water. What a shame. Her courage gave out just as she could have saved you. "Doesn't matter to us. We'll get out of here somehow. I still have Stormbringer with me. You and your Wendigos can't even touch it," Jack Thunder bluffed. He knew it was a lie. He had seen how the Wendigos had tried to grab Stormbringer earlier, but judging by how Blackheart reacted to having it shoved in her face, she sure wasn't going to pick it up. Why do you fight so hard for this world? Do you really think that a kid like you can defeat the Heart of Darkness? Jack Thunder's face turned from blue to bright red as he erupted onto Blackheart. At least I'm trying to do what's right. Unlike you. You learn the Heart of Darkness is returning and you join its side? For what? Some worthless treasure? Now it was Blackheart's turn to get offended. Jack Thunder yelped in pain as she planted her boot on his back. You've got some nerve, boy, she snarled. I oughta... All of a sudden, Jack Thunder felt the boot lift off his back. Captain Blackheart was hunched over in pain, gripping her ears. To his relief, the black blobs holding him and his team in place had dissolved too. That's when Jack Thunder noticed a familiar melody seemingly coming out of nowhere. That's it! It's working! Keep singing, guys! Buckthorn shouted. The entire ship was surrounded by sirens of all colors, and they were all singing their traditional siren melody. The wendigos evacuated the ship, choosing instead to circle overhead like vultures. Jack Thunder acted quickly. He ran over to Stormbringer and grabbed it, thrusting it towards Blackheart. Fell once! Destroy this storm gremlin! She screamed through her pain as she directed the wendigos circling overhead. They moved to obey her command. A wendigo swooped from above and tried to swallow Jack Thunder alive, but he blasted it to pieces using the lightning from his staff. Another grazed his side, but he blew it off to the side with a fierce wind. It tumbled some distance through the air before landing in the sea. Blackheart growled. She wasn't done yet. She drew her cutlass and moved to charge the troublesome storm gremlin. He stepped off to the side as she slipped on a patch of ice and skidded into the mast of the ship. Nice one, Frosty! Blackheart got back up and whipped around. She was met with San. The Tengu may have been old and underweight, but he was still the air champion of Alterus. He parried every swing of her cutlass with his arms and wings, bearing many cuts. Wendigos dive-bombed him from every angle, but he beat them back, using his wings to generate a powerful windstorm. Razor, who was perched on his shoulder, shot bolts of purple lightning from his mouth, zapping Blackheart when she got too close. Blackheart fought valiantly, but between fighting the 3 air fairies and Weather Wyvern all at once and the siren song still wafting through the air, she began to tire. Eventually, she fell to her knees, still clutching her head. Hurts. Stop. Jack Thunder moved quickly. He cast the same healing spell he'd used on Terry in Mount Tempest and held steady. Just as he'd expected, Blackheart doubled over and began retching. Viscous black fluid spurted from her mouth as the being that had taken residence inside her fought to get out. When the Wendigo finally came out, it was already quite exhausted from their battle. Its eyes glowed a faint, tarnished gold color. As Jack Thunder banished it, he could see it flying up towards a rift in the sky. But even as the Wendigo flew back into the rift, it did not seal. Strange, Jack Thunder thought. Aren't the rifts supposed to seal when a Wendigo is banished? That's when he remembered. The rifts only sealed when all of the Wendigos had been taken care of. He thought about the Wendigos that had attacked them earlier. They must have gotten away. He sighed. Guess we're gonna have to go back to the islands and look for them. Blackheart coughed. Jack Thunder jumped and pointed his staff at her, still a little jumpy from earlier. Ugh, where am I? She looked up and saw 4 fairies and 1 weather wyvern, all of them staring down at her. Frosty, San, and Razor glared at her in disappointment, while Jack Thunder and Buckthorn just looked a bit worried. That's when she remembered. After she'd heard of the Heart of Darkness's return, she'd fallen into despair. The Fragments of Anima had been lost in the war, and without them, she thought, there was no hope. All of her past loyalties fell away. Her only goal was taking whatever was valuable and getting out of Alterus. It didn't even occur to her that there was nowhere for her to go. But now, she had betrayed the nation she had sworn to protect. She said nothing. What was there really to say? What could she possibly say or do to make up for what she did? Hey, are you okay? That was some scuff we had, huh? Blackheart looked up and saw Jack Thunder, the same storm gremlin whose spine she'd tried to crush earlier. She couldn't even look him in the eye. Captain Blackheart, she heard San finally speak. What drove you to betray the nation you swore to protect? All for some of the Great Barrier Kingdom's treasure? Not only that, but you nearly killed my brother, Frosty snapped. Not to mention the rest of us. Suddenly, she remembered something. Something that might start to make up for what she did. I don't ask that you forgive me. But I have something in my cabin that might start to make up for what I've done. Blackheart made her way to her cabin and came back out. What she had in her hand shocked everyone. Is that the Seastone? Buckthorn exclaimed. I found it on the seafloor in this very ocean. I know it's not enough to defeat the Heart of Darkness by itself, but it definitely will help. Oh wow, this is great! Thanks, Blackheart! Jack Thunder cheered. I'll take you all back to the island, too. She took her place at the steering wheel and steered the ship towards the center island of the archipelago. Jack Thunder glanced once again at the rift in the sky. The fight was far from over. Interlude 2. Mallow the Maelstrom. Mallow was surrounded. The wendigos swirled around her like a tornado. It was only because of the Seastone that they didn't come any closer. How had she ended up here? Oh yes. She and San had broken off from the rest of the group to help liberate the lake near the Emerald Woodland. What was supposed to be a brief excursion turned dangerous as they realized there were far more wendigos near the lake than they anticipated. San had channeled some undifferentiated anima into the lake to clean it out. Instead of one giant wendigo, as they anticipated, several wendigos had shot out of the water, surrounding them both. The wendigos dove down, trying to snatch Stormbringer and the Seastone off of the two champions of Alterus. She and San couldn't even begin to cut a path through as they desperately tried to keep hold on to their fragments. They were trapped. That's when she remembered what the Seastone could do. Mallow sang a few notes, and the Seastone glowed a bright sapphire. Without warning, the two found themselves swept away by a deluge of seawater. Mallow grabbed onto San and the two of them made it to the surface. They were unharmed, simply gliding along as the tide swept them away. The same couldn't be said for the wendigos, though. They thrashed and screeched as they fought against the rushing waves. That's when Mallow noticed the Seastone glowing again, this time a brilliant teal. She sang the same melody backwards, and the tide rushed out, leaving the two champions on solid ground and the wendigos dazed and waterlogged. Now was their chance. Back to the flip side with you and your hate. You have no place in this land of dreams. We belong to Alterus. Alterus is ours. Now be gone. The beam of spectral light that burst forth from the two Anima Fragments forked and snaked around, touching every single wendigo on the battlefield and stripping them of all their ill-gotten magic. The beams merged once more and shot straight upwards, blasting the rift up above to pieces. Mallow noticed a dryad approaching her from the edge of the Emerald Woodland. Wow, that was amazing! How did you do that? She grabbed the Seastone in one hand. This is the Seastone. I forged it in the Sea of Forever to help defeat the Heart of Darkness. Well, I think it should be called the Maelstrom. That's what it looked like to me anyway, with how the tide just came rushing in like that. By the way, what are your names? I'm Mallow. This is San. Mallow. I guess we can call you Mallow the Maelstrom from now on. And so, Mallow was henceforth known as Mallow the Maelstrom. The lake she and San purged that day became known as Mallow Lake in homage to the water champion. Her name was spread all across the land of Alterus. Many songs were written about Mallow the Maelstrom, telling the tale of how she saved the nations from the wendigos. She thought it was a fitting title. Chapter 8. Captured. Jackie? Jackie, wake up! Jack Thunder startled awake. He groaned and rubbed his eyes. He couldn't believe he fell asleep. That skirmish with Captain Blackheart must have worn him out more than he thought it did. All right. He lifted himself off the floor of the deck. I'm awake. You don't have to shout. He shook his head as his vision cleared. He couldn't believe it was evening already. The sun hung low in the sky, which was painted in hues of pink and yellow. But sure enough, they had arrived. The ship was docked right next to the beach. He looked over to his left side. Buckthorn had been asleep too. She was just stirring from her nap. She pulled herself into a sitting position and wiped her eyes. Hurry up, you two! We're losing time! Jack Thunder looked up and saw Frosty, San, and Blackheart standing over him. He looked over to Buckthorn and she nodded. They got themselves on their feet. Jack Thunder taking his place at the front of the crowd, he, Frosty, San, and Razor disembarked. Stormbringer started pulsating as soon as Jack Thunder was on the land. All of a sudden, the staff began pulsing faster and faster. Looking down, he could see the Seastone he was carrying around his neck pulsing at the same speed. Before he could react, swarms of possessed islanders burst out of the jungle. The team tried to fend them off, but the islanders quickly overwhelmed them. The last thing Jack Thunder saw before he blacked out was Buckthorn reaching for him. When Jack Thunder regained consciousness, he could see a grid blocking his vision. It soon dawned on him that this was a steel cage. Stormbringer was outside his cage, just out of his reach. Looking through the bars, he could see the rest of the team had been trapped in the same steel cages. San was quietly observing, thinking of what to do next. Frosty was trying to use her ice beams to rust the bars of her cage. Razor had the same idea, gnawing at his cage. And Buckthorn? Buckthorn was backed up against the bars, terrified. All of a sudden, Jack Thunder got an idea. Buckthorn's cage was the closest to his. He looked down. I've still got the Seastone with me. He tapped on the bars of his cage to get her attention. Buckthorn, I've still got the Seastone. I'm gonna give it to you. You'll have a much easier time using it than I will. Buckthorn paled. Me? But just take it. He stuck his hand out of his cage. Buckthorn reached out and grabbed it. He continued. You were the one who rallied all those sirens to help us with Blackheart earlier. So don't sit here and say that you're not hero material. I know you are. You're the one who saved my life when I was about to drown in the sea. Do you remember that? She nodded slowly. Don't worry. The rest of us are right behind you. Just as soon as we get out of these cages... Jack Thunder charged up his lightning magic and shocked the bars of his cage. They didn't budge. If we get out of these cages, he muttered under his breath. He zapped the bars a few more times. He could only manage to melt them a little bit before having to rest. At this rate, the Heart of Darkness would take over Alterus before he managed to get out of there. That's when he heard a familiar voice. Jack Thunder? Emily? The squirrel woman nodded. Sorry if I'm late. I didn't want the others knowing that I wasn't infected anymore. Here, I'll get you out." She inserted a key into the lock of Jack Thunder's cage, and the door swung open. He crawled out as she went on unlocking the other cages. As soon as he was out, Jack Thunder grabbed Stormbringer. He looked to his left arm, which was still in its cast. It definitely felt a lot better, but the muscles still felt weak. He must still have had some null magic in his system. He sighed. He would rest as soon as he was able, but he could hold Stormbringer in his right hand for now. He looked to the others. Everyone seemed to be alright. Frosty in particular seemed relieved to be out of that cage. San bowed his head. "Thank you, Miss Current, for rescuing us. Do you know where the others are?" "They're all over the island. I would be careful out there. The crossfire stopped, but they're still real ornery." "Don't worry about it. I've got Stormbringer and Buckthorn's got the Seastone. They wouldn't dare to get too close to us, right, Buckthorn?" Buckthorn nodded. She hoped Jack Thunder was right. The team had made quite a way in the jungle. Emily had decided to tag along to stay safe. Surprisingly, they hadn't seen any islanders at all so far. They only had row after row of tropical trees and evening shadow and the sound of crickets to keep them company. Even so, one could tell that the island was not the friendly place it once was. A thick, deathly chill hung in the air. Stormbringer and the Seastone pulsed in unison, their pulses growing more urgent as they approached whatever it was that was beyond the path they were on. Suddenly, Razor chirped. Jack Thunder saw light up ahead. No, many lights. The villagers. Their eyes were glowing just like Wendigo's eyes. Brace yourselves. Chapter 9. A Deluge of Darkness. The possessed villagers moved at an impossible speed. Jack Thunder managed to generate a lightning blast before they could reach the team, tossing them back like rag dolls. Undeterred, they got back up and began running at him again. The team fought valiantly, but after a few lightning blasts from Stormbringer, Jack Thunder's magic faltered. He didn't have the strength to keep this up, especially with his busted shoulder and null magic poisoning. He groaned internally. "I've come all this way for nothing." That's when he saw something. The Seastone. It was glowing. Its sapphire aura was unmistakable in this light. "Buckthorn!" he shouted to the reef siren. "I've got an idea. You need to activate the Seastone. It'll bring in the tides and wash away all the attackers." "What? But won't you get washed up too?" Buckthorn exclaimed. Jack Thunder had already almost drowned. Could she really risk that again? "Ugh, just do it! I can't hold them off much longer!" Well, if she didn't do it, who knew what the villagers would do to them? She clasped the Seastone and closed her eyes. She hummed a 3-note melody, one that was meant to activate magical artifacts. The Seastone's glow flashed from sapphire to white. That was when a massive tsunami crashed over the land, burying the jungle in a deluge of seawater. Jack Thunder had been prepared for this. He kicked his legs, quickly making his way up to the surface. Once he could breathe again, he focused on keeping his head above water. San held on to Frosty and Razor, making sure they weren't swept away. The latter seemed to be enjoying the fray, happily gliding through the new waters he found himself in. Buckthorn, being a reef siren, didn't need to make her way to the surface at all. She just needed to keep herself from being sucked into something sharp by the questing tide. Buckthorn noticed the Seastone was glowing again. This time, it was glowing a greenish teal. She sang the same 3-note melody backwards. The tide rushed out, leaving the team and the villagers scattered across the now drenched jungle. Jack Thunder came to his senses. He was back on solid ground. The villagers were dazed, but for how long? Suddenly he saw his chance. The gem in Stormbringer's center began to shimmer with all colors of the rainbow. He spun around, casting the healing spell on all villagers simultaneously. All at once, the villagers expelled the wendigos inhabiting their bodies. The wendigos snarled and began circling Jack Thunder and Buckthorn, encasing them in a null magic tornado. 1,000 claws emerged from the windstorm, trying to snatch Stormbringer out of the storm gremlin's hand. Jack Thunder got another idea. "Hey Buckthorn, I'm gonna need you to use that spell again." Buckthorn didn't argue. Once again the tide came rushing in. Jack Thunder fired his staff at the approaching wave. It halted in its tracks. The wave coursed with green electricity as he grasped it in Stormbringer's telekinetic hold and directed it straight at the Wendigo whirlwind that surrounded them. As the wave crashed into it, the combined powers of water and air sent many Wendigos tumbling to the ground, shrieking all the way. Only a fraction of the Wendigos hit by the blast got back up to keep circling. "It's working!" Jack Thunder and Buckthorn thought simultaneously. Jack Thunder clumsily swung the levitated wave around like a baseball bat, repeatedly striking the tornado that surrounded them. Each time it hit, green lightning coursed through the whole whirlpool, sending more Wendigos to the ground, not to get up again. When the wave got too small from splashing around so much, Buckthorn sang the title song once again to summon a new one. Slowly but surely, the storm was dissipating. Eventually, only 5 Wendigos were left standing. Enraged, they switched strategies. They dove straight for the 2 troublesome fairies, but with a few more unwieldy zaps from Jack Thunder, and one more song from Buckthorn, they too were reduced to black puddles on the ground. The 2 huffed and puffed. They were exhausted, but they weren't done just yet. They could see writhing limbs emerging from the black puddles that dotted the landscape, only to collapse and splash back into them. Even in their depleted state, the monsters weren't going to give up just yet. It was time. Jack Thunder and Buckthorn held each other's hand. They gripped their Anima Fragments, and they began to recite the Wendigo banishing incantation. "Back to the flip side with you and your hate," Jack Thunder rebuked. Stormbringer and the Seastone lit up simultaneously. "You have no place in this land of dreams," Buckthorn continued the incantation. The glow of their fragments turned white. "We belong to Alterus. Alterus is ours." The glow became brighter than ever, shimmering with all colors of the rainbow. "Now be gone!" This time, instead of one solid beam of magic, the spell split into many smaller beams of undifferentiated anima. These beams of light slithered through the sky like serpents, seeking out each and every Wendigo on the field. Otherworldly shrieks echoed through the rainforest. Jack Thunder and Buckthorn could see countless faces and claws form, writhe, and dissolve helplessly as each and every Wendigo puddle was swept up and cleansed by the purifying magic. The beams rocketed towards the sky, straight up at the rift right above their heads. The 2 fairies felt a small burst of energy as the rift in the sky sealed. Jack Thunder stared up at the night sky for a long time. Behind him, he could hear the confused murmurs of no longer possessed islanders, trying to get a sense of where they were. He didn't notice Emily was behind him until she placed her hand on his shoulder. "Hey Jack, you alright? You don't look so good." He responded with a long groan that ended in a strangled sob. He didn't understand. They had won the battle. The archipelago was free. So why was he crying? Now, when he could take a deep breath, he felt the full brunt of the day's stress. He fell to his knees and hugged the ground, shouting into the mud puddle he found himself lying in. He had been bottling up everything all day. He just needed to let it out. It helped him feel better at least. He began to relax after a few minutes. When he looked back up, Buckthorn, San, Razor, and Emily were all staring at him with worried looks. Don't worry, I'm fine. This whole dang day. First the thing with getting attacked, then breaking my shoulder and nearly drowning, then the whole mess with Blackheart, then this. He took a deep breath. I've had a long day, he finished before collapsing into the dirt once more. They couldn't disagree. Frosty picked him up, letting him rest on her shoulder. Before he knew it, he was fast asleep. Chapter 10. Recovery. A bright light teased Jack Thunder awake. This couldn't be his room back on Tempest Island. The sun never shone this brightly in his storm cloud-filled home. And why did he feel so bad? The only times he felt this unwell were when he caught a stomach bug as a widget. But this was more of a sickness of the spirit than a sickness of the body. His body was undoubtedly exhausted, but that was nothing compared to his mental fatigue. He opened his eyes. When his vision cleared, he could see he was in one of those palm log buildings of the villages around the Turquoise Archipelago. His arm was wrapped in a brand new cast, the old having been all but destroyed in the battle the night before. Glancing towards the door, Jack Thunder saw Buckthorn. About time you woke up, it's almost noon. I really slept until noon? That's a first, the storm gremlin thought. He must have been more worn out than he thought. Frosty brought you in here last night. Your null magic poisoning had gotten worse since you pushed yourself to exhaustion. The healers here gave you a few potions to try and reduce it, but it looks like you'll be in here for a while. Jack Thunder hung his head. Looks like he was being scolded once again. I'm sorry, I did it again, didn't I? Hey, don't be. Buckthorn smiled. If it weren't for you, these islands would still be in danger. Even your sister agreed. There wasn't much better that could be done. Right now, we just need you to get well again. Jack Thunder laid his head back down on the pillow. Sensing that he was getting tired, Buckthorn headed for the door. Everyone outside is celebrating. I'll bring back some pineapple cake for you, okay? He made a small affirmative grunt, nodding slightly. Okay, I'm gonna leave you alone now. She closed the door behind her. Yes, his shoulder is healing just fine. That null magic will take a while to clear out, though. If he'd been resting as he should have, it would have left his system by now. Frosty sighed. As much as she wanted to give her brother an earful for not following Doctor's orders, she really couldn't. He had no choice. What else was he supposed to do? Let Blackheart and the wendigoes take over the island? San was right next to her, wearing a somber expression. He understood just as well as she did. Even Razor seemed to understand what was going on. The weather wyvern whined in concern. Is he at least doing better? He's doing just fine. He's a delight to be around, actually. Kid's been through a lot, but he just keeps on smiling. He actually asked me about you earlier. I'm going to check to see if he's awake so that you can see him. San thought about the battle the night before. He recalled how Jack Thunder broke down and cried after his victory. Sure, a lot of that was from exhaustion, but he couldn't help but think that the younger storm gremlin was in a lot of pain, too. Being forced to fight with a busted shoulder and null magic poisoning. It couldn't have been easy on him. Not to mention what Frosty was likely going through. Not being able to protect him when he was hurt or when he nearly drowned. She wore a stoic expression, but he could tell that she was struggling with the guilt. All right, He's awake. You can see him now." The three followed the healer up to Jack Thunder's recovery room. Ugh, disgusting. Jack Thunder looked over from the sink, spotting even more black gunk in the toilet. Just how much null magic was there in his system? He thought the potions he was on were supposed to fast-track his recovery, but every time he went to the bathroom, which was a lot lately, his body expelled even more of that wretched substance. At least it doesn't smell that much. "Jackie, are you in here?" "Just 1 second." He quickly flushed the toilet and finished washing his hands. He opened the door to the suite bathroom in his recovery room. He came face to face with Frosty and San. Razor sat on the latter's shoulder. "Oh, I didn't think you'd be right outside. You guys wouldn't believe what they've got me on. Lay potions 3 times a day. Tastes like hot garbage, and they make me go to the bathroom all the time." Yep, he was all right. The treatments were working. Frosty cleared her throat. Jack Thunder paused. "So, I guess I've got some explaining to do, huh?" "Jackie, I saw what happened back in the Great Barrier Kingdom. That wasn't your fault. It was actually kind of impressive how you did all that with just your right hand," San continued. "What happened to you and Buckthorn when you were sealed in that wendigo storm anyhow?" Jack Thunder perked up. "Buckthorn did most of the work. She used the Seastone to summon the tide over and over. I just swung it into the wendigos." Frosty blinked. "Oh, I saw that green lightning flash over and over. I thought maybe you'd had something to do with it. She must have been seeing the water conducting as lightning." "I guess." Jack Thunder lay back down on the bed. He was getting tired again. Sensing that he would need time to sleep, Frosty and San left the room. Razor stayed behind, leaping onto Jack Thunder's bed and curling up beside him. Before long, the two were soundly asleep. "Jack, are you asleep?" Buckthorn asked as she came in. "I just woke up. How was the party?" "It was all right. Everyone's really riled after what happened. I think they were just trying to forget about what happened. Like I blame them," she answered. "Here, I brought you some cake." "Oh, thanks." The cake was adorned with pineapple rings and toasted coconut shavings. Razor sniffed it. "No, Razor, not for wyverns," he scolded as he petted Razor's head. Buckthorn opened her hand, showing a few small pieces of chicken. "Here, I think he can have this. Don't worry, there's no bones." She set it in front of Razor. The weather wyvern sniffed it before licking it up. "I found him on Tempest Island. I think he's an orphan. Sana's been really helping me take care of him. I guess we're a lot alike." "What do you mean?" Did Jack Thunder really want to tell her? "Frosty and I, our parents, we lost them in the war. Frosty's been raising me since I was like 3. Oh, I'm so sorry." Jack Thunder shrugged her off as he took another bite of the cake. "It's all right. I don't really remember them anyway. I was kind of the lucky one. Frosty remembers them better, and it was really hard on her." Both of them were silent for a while as Jack Thunder finished his cake. Razor stared at him, looking for any crumbs that dropped. He broke the silence as he gave his muscles a good stretch. "Ugh, staying in this room is torture. I think I can chance going outside now." "The healers might not agree. Look, there's a balcony connected to the window. Maybe that would help." "That would be better, actually. If he felt sick again, he could just go back inside and go to bed." He shuffled off the bed and walked towards the window. Just outside was a beautiful sunset. One click of the door later, and he, Buckthorn, and Razor were outside. Chapter 11. Twilight Falls. Jack Thunder's shoulders relaxed, The pain in his left shoulder faded. Buckthorn was right. Just being out on the balcony helped. At the very least, it was far better than being confined within those four walls. Razor agreed. The weather wyvern hopped up on the wooden railing and perched himself next to the storm gremlin. I always thought the sunset around here looked like the colors of a mango. Doesn't it look like that to you? Buckthorn asked. Well, the sky was certainly red and orange and yellow. Jack Thunder couldn't see any green, though. Maybe if mangoes were blue and purple, and if they had stars in them. I suppose so. That's when it dawned on him. Summer was almost over. September was just around the corner. And for the storm gremlin, that meant only one thing. Ah! The Dark Carnival's gonna be here soon. You ever been? No, not really. I've never been far from the Great Barrier Kingdom. Oh, you've gotta come. I'm gonna try and talk Frosty into taking us. What about the wendigos? Oh, don't worry. We've already got 2 of the fragments. We found the Seastone within, what? 2 days? At this rate, I'm sure we'll be fine. Nothing wrong with a little break, right? Buckthorn didn't disagree. After their adventure, it would be nice to take a load off for a while. Especially with Jack Thunder's shoulder. It was only for a couple days after all. I can't believe it's almost September already. Son's life had really picked up the pace since he met Jack Thunder. It seemed like just yesterday he met the little storm gremlin on Tempest Island when he was looking for his staff. That was only 2 months ago. Now, he was sitting on the beach of the Turquoise Archipelago's central island with autumn rapidly approaching. He could already feel it in his bones. It was warm, but there was a faint nip in the air. Well, it was at least warmer than it was in the Razorfrost Range. Son shuddered at the memory of that accursed mountain range. Now that he had remembered what it had been like to sit in the balmy sunshine, spending even one more minute in that icy inferno sounded like nothing short of torture. He looked over at Frosty. She might enjoy it, though. Hey, are you alright? What? Oh, I'm alright, just a bit lost in thought, that's all. Frosty looked him over. You look a lot better. That was probably because he was eating more, especially at the party. A couple of the talking animals, the ones serving the cake, noticed how skinny Son was. Anima blessed them, they practically shoved that pineapple cake down his throat. He couldn't complain too much, it was pretty good cake. There were also these 2 dryads there. He wasn't sure if they were twins or cousins. What were their names? Sweet and Sour Apple, they said. They had a whole wheelbarrow full of apples. Said they'd sprouted them during the last cherry sun. Red and green ones. They were betting between themselves how many of each kind they could sell. Surprisingly goofy characters for being tree people. It had been such a long time since Son had truly interacted with the people of Alterus on this level. He began to regret the decade he spent in isolation. He had missed out on so much. All because of how he hated being venerated. Now that he thought about it, he couldn't really be mad at them. They had every reason to honor what he did. And that didn't make them shallow either. And since he was thinking about celebrations, another thought came to mind. Is the Dark Carnival still a thing? It was supposed to be coming around about this time of year. Strombolio used to be a performer in the Circus of Shadows, and he would often talk about how he used to use the Dark Fragment, Lethal Joke, to launch fireworks. Son would have liked to see one of those fireworks shows. They sounded like a blast. Maybe Strombolio was still working with the Circus of Shadows. He might have some idea as to where the Fragment of Darkness might be. Of course, it was anyone's guess, but the timing was perfect. And even if it wasn't at the Dark Carnival, Son could have used a short rest anyway. Same as Jack Thunder, poor thing. He could use some rest too after busting his shoulder. To think that he'd fought 2 battles with that kind of injury, plus null magic poisoning. It would take him a few days to get out of the hospital, if not weeks. Knowing him, though, San was certain that Jack Thunder would want to go to the Dark Carnival after he got out of the hospital. He turned to Frosty. Is the Dark Carnival still a thing? Yeah, I'm not so sure about it, though. We're on an important mission here. I don't want us getting distracted. Actually, I think that there's a chance that the Dark Fragment might still be with the Circus of Shadows. And if not, it won't hurt us to take a couple of days off. Frosty looked a little shocked. Even with the coming black sun? The Heart of Darkness isn't that desperate. Not yet. Wendigos don't show their ugly faces unless they need to. And besides, there's no way we can collect all 4 of the other fragments in a few weeks, especially with Jack's injury. Best not to worry too much about things we can't control. Frosty wasn't sure if she believed that, but she trusted San, so she had nothing else to say. The two continued to sit on the beach, staring into the sunset. Chapter 12. Black Sun Rising. Meanwhile, in the flip side, the superior Wendigo scowled. Those fools had one job. One job. They were supposed to harvest the anima from the Turquoise Archipelago and retrieve Stormbringer from the child who wielded it. All they had to do was keep hold over that reef siren Blackheart. Now, the incompetent blobs of ink were back in the flip side, stripped of all their power. We're sorry, Lord Nemesis. You're sorry? Nemesis snarled at the inferior Wendigos, its distorted voice shifting in pitch every few words. I want to know how you loused up the one task I gave you. All you had to do was get that staff and bring it to me. But instead, you let yourselves be defeated by that little storm gremlin and his reef siren friend. You lost to a child. We couldn't help it, Lord Nemesis. The child has a powerful handle on the staff Stormbringer. That Tengu was there too. The Air Champion of Alterus was there? With the Storm Gremlin? Now Nemesis was curious. We believe he is training the Storm Gremlin, my lord. So, the Tengu is passing on his duties to someone younger, Nemesis thought. Maybe the Air Champion isn't so indestructible after all. Nemesis opened a window to Alterus. Through the window it could see the Storm Gremlin and the little reef siren. Looked like the former still had that shoulder injury. All of a sudden, it heard him speak. Ah, the Dark Carnival's gonna be here soon. You ever been? No, not really. I've never been far from the Great Barrier Kingdom. Oh, you've gotta come. I'm gonna try to talk to Frosty into taking us. So, the Storm Gremlin and the Reef Siren are going to the fair. How sweet. Nemesis chuckled to itself. But where was the Dark Carnival? It opened another window to Alterus, this one in the lobby of the hospital Jack Thunder was staying at. A closer look at one of the pamphlets revealed that the Dark Carnival was going to be held in the Nursery Rhyme District this year. Nemesis snickered. This was all too perfect. The black sun was nearly upon them. The Dark Carnival ensured a healthy supply of hosts to drain anima from, and the meddling kids were going to be there? Nemesis's form shifted. Its body assumed a form not unlike the Yule goats of Alterus. Its head became a fanged ram skull. Its body assumed a humanoid form, complete with sharp claws and cloven hooves for feet. And cinched around its neck was a red and gray cape with a high mantle and the null insignia it clasped around its throat. It truly resembled the demon it was. It let out a roaring cackle. Never mind that. The black sun is nearly upon us. I shall make my way to Alterus to get rid of those meddlers once and for all. Don't bother coming with. Incompetent fools such as yourselves stand no chance against the Fragments of Anima. I, on the other hand, will be the one to destroy them for good. Then there will be nothing standing in our way of having all the anima we could ever want." Nemesis jumped straight through the rift. Those blundering fools may have loused this one up, but this next task was so simple that not even they could fail. Nemesis certainly wouldn't fail. There was a reason it was the Heart of Darkness's top general. It would destroy that gremlin and all of his friends. And it would find those fragments of anima and destroy them too. Then there would be nothing standing between the wendigos and the magic of Alterus. The heart would allow nothing less. Hi there, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you would like more from our friend Jack Thunder, you can check out my new book series, Jack Thunder and the Fragments of Anima, on Amazon using the link in the description. Or you can head on over to my Teespring and grab a few things from my shop. And please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more content every week. Thank you for watching.